We are talking about a massive arc today. We're connecting the ancient highlands of Ethiopia to the hush harbors of the American South, because the listener asked us to explore the legacy of the Black Church and the Watch Night tradition.
You can't understand the Black Church in America without understanding that it is a resistance movement born from a theology of liberation. But to really get it, you have to go back to the root. You have to look at the only place where that faith was never broken, never colonized, and never filtered through a European lens: Ethiopia. A spiritual legacy survived that did two miraculous things. It kept one African nation, Ethiopia, completely free from colonization, and it fueled the fire that burned down the institution of slavery in America.
The night of December 31st isn't about champagne, it is about survival. It is called Watch Night. And then, exactly 1 week later, on January 7th, you have Genna, the Ethiopian Christmas. I want to understand how these two dates, separated by an ocean and a calendar system, create this unified story you call a freedom liturgy.
It is a frequency that connects a pine board church in South Carolina to a rock-hewn temple in the highlands of Ethiopia. You are talking about the 14 days that act as a bridge between two very different ideas of freedom.
To understand that bridge, Noah, we have to stand in the dark of December 31st, 1862. That night wasn't symbolic. It was the most high-stakes deadline in American history. You have 4 million enslaved people who know that the Emancipation Proclamation is sitting on Abraham Lincoln's desk. But until the clock strikes 12, it is just paper. It is a promise that could be revoked, delayed, or ignored.
But you've brought some research today that suggests the infrastructure of freedom, the literal money, was largely built by Black financiers long before Lincoln picked up a pen.
This is the part that always stuns me. We know the names of the white abolitionists, William Lloyd Garrison, for example. We know he published The Liberator, the most famous anti-slavery newspaper. But Noah, who paid for the printing press?
Who are these free Black abolitionists?
The distinction is profound. If you look at a city like Philadelphia in the 1840s and 50s, you find a Black elite that is arguably more educated and cosmopolitan than many white Southerners. Take James Forten, who the listener mentioned. He wasn't just free, he was a titan of industry. He invented a sail handling device that revolutionized shipping. He employed white workers. He was worth over $100,000 in 1830s currency. That's millions today.
These men were freedom's financiers. They proved that abolition wasn't a gift from the white conscience. It was a strategic operation funded by Black wealth.
But here is the tension. James Forten lived in a mansion, but he could walk down the street and be kidnapped by slave catchers because of the Fugitive Slave Act. His freedom was always provisional. That's the psychological distinction.
He essentially funded the early years of the Liberator. He was cutting sails for a country that was trying to cut him out of the Constitution.
That's an incredible image. Using the tools of commerce, sails, ships, to dismantle the commerce of human beings.
And he wasn't alone. You have Paul Cuffey, a Black Quaker and ship owner. In 1815, nearly 50 years before the Civil War, he used his own fleet to take 38 African Americans to Sierra Leone. He was trying to build a transatlantic economy that wasn't based on bondage.
He built a small empire. During the Revolutionary War, he was actually slipping through British blockades in small sailboats to deliver goods to Nantucket. Think about the audacity of that. A Black man navigating a war zone, outsmarting the Royal Navy, and turning a profit. Later, he built his own shipyard on the Westport River. His ships were these floating contradictions to the idea that Black men couldn't handle complex economics. Every time a Cuffey ship docked in a foreign port, insured and captained by a Black man, it was a geopolitical argument.
So you have this duality. In the North, you have the free Black strategy: wealth, printing presses, lobbying, James Forten hosting salons. In the South, you have the enslaved strategy: hush harbors, breaking tools, the invisible revolt. And these two streams crash together on Watch Night, 1862.
They do, and we actually have a witness who stood right at the intersection. James Forten's granddaughter, Charlotte Forten.
She is 25 years old, raised in luxury, educated in literature. She travels to St. Helena Island to teach newly freed children, and her journals are incredible because they show that friction we talked about. She arrives wearing her crinoline dresses, and she meets formerly enslaved people who speak a dialect she initially can't understand. She writes about the spirituals. She realizes that their resilience is something she, for all her education, has never had to test.
It's a beautiful image. The granddaughter of the wealthy sailmaker teaching the alphabet to children who were legally property just months before. But it wasn't just teachers, right? The listener mentioned the USCT, the United States Colored Troops.
This is the militant side of that travel. You have to talk about Martin Delany. Delany was a free black man, an editor, a doctor. He had actually been accepted to Harvard Medical School and then kicked out because white students protested. He was angry, militant, and brilliant. In 1865, he becomes the first black field officer in the U.S. Army, a major. And where does he go? He travels straight to South Carolina.
What was his goal?
Recruitment and liberation. Imagine the visual. Major Martin Delany, in a crisp Union uniform with gold oak leaves on his shoulders, walking onto a plantation where black men have seen nothing but white overseers.
So fast forward to December 31, 1862. The war is raging. You have these precedents of resistance, Cuffy, Fortin, Attucks. But on this specific night, the resistance shifts from economic demonstration to spiritual vigil. Take us inside those pine board churches.
The atmosphere is electric anxiety. You have to remember, the Emancipation Proclamation was a war measure. It only applied to the states in rebellion. But for the enslaved people in the Sea Islands of South Carolina, who were under Union occupation, this was the moment the universe tilted. They gathered in these hush harbors and makeshift sanctuaries. They weren't just praying, they were waiting for a legal verdict. The song, I Want to Be Ready, to walk in Jerusalem just like John, it was about walking into a new legal status at midnight.
We actually have an eyewitness account of the next morning, January 1st, from James Fortin's own granddaughter, right?
Charlotte Fortin. She is one of the most important diarists of the American Civil War. She stood there on January 1st, 1863. She describes the moment the 1st South Carolina Volunteers, a regiment of black soldiers, received the colors.
These were men who, a week earlier, were legally considered property.
Property in Union blue. And when they received the flag, Charlotte writes that something unplanned happened. An old black woman began to sing, My Country, 'Tis of Thee. Then another voice joined, then another. It wasn't a performance, it was a reclamation. They were singing Sweet Land of Liberty to a country that had just admitted for the first time that they were part of the land. Charlotte wrote that the air tasted of salt and deliverance.
He gathers them around and says, essentially, I am an officer of the United States, and I look like you. He recruited thousands of men into the USCT. He bridged that gap between the free North and the enslaved South instantly.
The USCT was the melting pot of black America. You had the 54th Massachusetts, which was largely free northern black men, barbers, farmers, tradesmen who traveled south to fight. But then you had regiments like the 1st South Carolina Volunteers, composed almost entirely of escaped enslaved men. When these two groups fought together, or when the Northern 54th marched past a plantation, it shattered the Southern worldview.
A regiment of disciplined, armed, literate black men marched through Charleston or liberated a plantation along the Combahee River. The lie didn't just crumble, it was trampled under their boots.
You mentioned the Combahee River. We can't talk about traveling south without talking about the ultimate traveler, Harriet Tubman.
The general herself. Tubman is unique because she straddles both worlds. She was born enslaved in the South, escaped to the North, and then went back into the belly of the beast. In June 1863, she becomes the first woman to lead a major military assault in U.S. history. She guides Union gunboats up the Combahee River in South Carolina.
This wasn't just a raid, it was a mass jailbreak.
It was biblical. The gunboats blow the whistles and people just come pouring out of the field. And who is there to greet them? Harriet Tubman and black soldiers. Most of the men liberated that day immediately joined the USCT. So you see the cycle. The traveler, Tubman, comes south, liberates the enslaved, who then become soldiers to liberate others. It's the ultimate rebuke to the 1803 expansionism.
Men who had been property hours earlier, singing My Country, 'Tis of Thee, Sweet Land of Liberty, of Thee I Sing. Charlotte wrote, it was no longer their country, it was ours. That moment rebaptized the song. They weren't singing about the America that was, they were singing the America into existence that they were about to fight for.
That is the definition of watch night. It's the midnight where you claim the promise before the sun actually rises. But Eloise, this brings us to the second half of our timeline. Because while watch night is about political and legal freedom, the breaking of chains, you argue that it's incomplete without January 7.
Right. If watch night is about the body, Ethiopian Christmas, Genna, is about the soul.
So let's synthesize this. We have this 13-day corridor, December 31st to January 7th. You're calling this the season of the midnight promise.
I think we need to reclaim these 13 days as a liturgical season of resistance. But this season says, work of freedom is just starting.
It's a bridge.
It's a bridge from the political to the spiritual. Imagine if we treated January 1st not just as a day for a hangover in football, but as Freedom's Eve, a day to support modern abolitionist work, to fund the James Fortons of our time. And then, instead of sliding into the January blues, you move toward January 7th with intention. You fast from something. You give away the money you saved.
You're suggesting a kind of rhythm. January 1st is, I am free. January 7th is, what is my freedom for?
Beautifully put. I am free. That's the Emancipation Proclamation. What is my freedom for? That's the incarnation. It is for goodness. It is for finding goodness in your community. If Charlotte Forton could stand in a field in 1863, surrounded by the wreckage of war, and declare, it is our country now, surely we can spend 13 days being intentional about how we use our own liberty.
I want to circle back to the legal argument the listener raised. They mentioned the disrespect for the creed of this new nation. We often hear that the South seceded for states' rights, but based on the history we've just laid out, the 1803 reopening of the trade, the violation of the Northwest Ordinance, it seems like they were actually fighting for federal overreach when it suited them.
That is the great irony. The South claimed the Northwest Ordinance was unconstitutional because it limited their property rights to move enslaved people wherever they wanted. They argued that the Constitution's protection of property superseded the human rights creed of the Declaration of Independence. When they couldn't force the North to participate in their system via the Fugitive Slave Act or by opening new territories to slavery, they shattered the Union. The war happened because the South refused to accept that the 1787 ban and the 1808 ban were the writing on the wall. They tried to turn back the clock.
So, in a way, people like Charlotte Forton and Martin Delany weren't just aiding their people. They were enforcing the original, albeit broken, promise of the country.
Exactly. When Charlotte Forton taught a child to read on St. Helena Island, she was enforcing the Northwest Ordinance's spirit, where the law had failed. When the USCT marched into Richmond, they were physically enacting the 1808 ban on treating humans as cargo. They were the distinct, free, northern black consciousness returning to the South to say the time for this contradiction is over.
It's a powerful reminder that abolition wasn't a passive political stance. It was a physical movement of people, traveling from safety into danger to make the nation whole. Thank you for walking us through that history, Alex.
My pleasure. It's a story that deserves to be known.
And thank you to our listener for that profound question. For The Unfolding, I'm Chloe.
And I'm Alex. Keep reading.